Okay, so yes, my presentation is on the New College of Florida Food Forest and Carbon Farm. It is a student-led project. It's almost actually, we're about a day away from its birthday. It was planted, the whole process that went into its creation took pretty much the entire school year of last year, but the trees were actually planted on May 20th of the previous year, so it's exciting. This is what it looks like. Well, not exactly. It's actually been cleaned up quite a bit. This is what it had looked like in the past couple months. I think this was taken in February or so. So yeah, we'll dive into it. First off, I'd like to acknowledge a few people. These are people that were very integral to the project. I did this with a partner. His name's Orion Morton, and there are many other individuals that were integral to the process. So yeah, the question why? As I'm sure that most of you are aware, climate change is in my opinion, the most dire issue that humanity has ever faced. In addition to nuclear war, those two things are literally unprecedented threats to the planet, to our species, to all species. And the food forest is kind of a physical manifestation of that urgency, and it is a student denial of the ideas that brought us to this place in terms of the paradigms that are so destructive that have brought us to the point of some people hypothesizing that within 100 years our species will not be able to continue to live on this planet. And so those of us that went about this obviously feel this sentiment very strongly, and we feel that it is literally a duty to do our best to act to mitigate this. And so we, as new college students, weren't really sure what to do in a way that is as tangible and as effective as possible. And so we decided to do the food forest. I am the organic garden TA down on the other side of campus. We have the Caples campus. It's kind of a sliver down there, and the food forest, the garden is in the background there. The garden has been there for years, but the food forest is a recent extension onto that. We also wanted to, food production systems and local food food production systems are very, they contribute very heavily to greenhouse gas emissions, and a way to circumvent that is to localize your food production. It brings you, kind of empowers your own sense of responsibility for climatological matters. It empowers one to think more holistically as in terms of how you approach environmental issues. And also we wanted to empower students to realize that this issue is a generational one, the climate change one. Those that created the problem and the paradigms that created the problem will not be around to reap its benefits. So we went about this project with the explicit purpose of making that very clear to students that this is a problem of unprecedented urgency, and that you can do, you should feel obligated to do all that you can to address the problem. And also, trees are charismatic, they're beautiful, they provide fruit, they bring a person into, I've noticed throughout my time of teaching about these things and just interacting with students, there's a very tangible and very visceral reaction that a person gets when, say, they've tried a new fruit for the first time that they picked off the tree. It's a very powerful experience that a person can have. And so we wanted to take advantage of that and utilize the educational potential of that dynamic. The history. So this is the co-founder, Orion. This is what the food forest once looked like. This is it was just a lawn kind of to the south of our garden there. And this was the very first, we were planting trees this day. It was kind of an unofficial, this was before it was officially sanctioned, but those trees have since been moved. And that was actually outside of no one can tell you about this. This is outside of the, what would become the official bounds of the food forest. And this was our first layer of mulch. You can see the stakes there as the space began to take shape. And we laid down some banana leaves there, and then this as the as we got going, we started to get a little more intense. We sheet mulched the whole area, which consists of laying down cardboard and then putting wood chip mulch over that, and to shade out the grass and to kind of reset the space. And then we brought in compost and topsoil to construct the berms. There's a student doing the sheet mulching. We did all this work through the organic gardening tutorial, which I teach, and so that provided a nice labor force for us all. And yeah, there's Orion kind of shaping the berms pre-planting. And then there it is almost a year ago. That was on the day of planting. The little baby trees, a lot of them are bigger now. Some, like not all of them made it through the first year, but we've replanted a few and we've expanded it a lot, and it's looking good. So yeah, carbon farming is kind of the central theoretical idea behind all of this. Carbon farming uses the capacity of trees to fix carbon, like they literally synthesize air and sunlight and water into wood and sugars. And by doing that, they form all these symbiotic relationships with soil microbes. There's a thing called the liquid carbon pathway, which is essentially a highway between the leaves of the tree or the plant and the fungi, the bacteria that form these associations with the roots of the plants. And they, like for example, fungi produce compounds that enhance the nutritive content of the trees, and in exchange the tree gives them more sugars, and by sugars have a lot of carbon in them. And so as this production pumps up, you get a nice feedback loop. More carbon is sequestered, the tree goes faster, it enriches the soil, the other things around it grow faster. And so yeah, we're trying to harness that dynamic that happens naturally. Most of the trees are perennial crops, meaning that it's not like an annual crop that doesn't die every season, so that trees are by nature perennial. Perennial food crops require generally less input once they're established, and they sequester more carbon in the long term. And also it's a polyculture, like it's, for example, when you driving through Indiana or something and you just see miles and miles and miles of one crop, corn, that's not an ecologically sensible system. And so we saw it fit to have the food forest be as diverse as possible, because that enhances the resilience of the space, and it's multifunctional. We have food crops, we've got flowers, we've got fruits, we have tubers, all manner of things growing. The picture there is a little lychee tree. It actually set fruit this year, and I had the first lychee ever produced by the food forest yesterday. It was a religious experience, to say the least. Oops, going backwards. Yeah, so in addition to being a scientifically based theory, it's also, carbon farming is also an idea with a lot of social potential. Some of the most exciting aspects of it, or some of the most exciting potential ideas or like applications of the concept are with smallholder farms in the developing countries, because a lot of these places people have been kind of divested. Like for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of people have been discouraged from growing the crops that they traditionally did in favor of like corn and things for economic reasons, and those techniques are different from what have been traditionally done, and so in the long term they tend to be kind of more ecologically damaging, and so there are people that are trying to reintroduce these more ecologically harmonious agricultural techniques to those parts of the world. And it's also a climate change adaptation strategy. Like these people, the central tenet of the ideas of environmental justice is that those that are least responsible for climate change will be the very first to feel its effects, also known as people living in these subsistence situations in these developing countries. And so this is a way for those people to, like for example, once these, like for example, if you went to one of these places and tried to encourage the establishment of a food forest, it'll make like a little less economic sense at first because it takes longer to establish and the trees take longer to produce a yield. But in the long term, the trees will live longer and they will ideally continue to produce for years. So this is a sweet potato harvest from the food forest. I found literally the largest sweet potato I've ever seen in the food forest the other day. It's like that long. It's like two times the size of a football. So yeah, it's a productive little system already, which is exciting. Also, yeah, it's a educational tool, as I've spoken a little bit about already. Like it's like I teach the gardening tutorial, and so this is now just an extension as opposed to just being like annual crops. We now have trees, so we have multiple things going on at once. Like we can explore other topics, like I've been teaching students how to graft, been teaching students how to prune trees, and all these other things that require kind of the long-term maintenance. And also long-term maintenance is something that new college students are notoriously bad at. It was like at the beginning of the process, it was one of the most frequently addressed issues when we were trying to negotiate with administrators, which is understandable because new college is academically intense and projects tend to taper off once the semester gets going. But we see this as an opportunity to impress upon our fellow students the value of kind of slow and steady work. It's not the most romantic work. A lot of time you're sweating and getting little cuts on your fingers and things, but I think that we have so far demonstrated to the students that it is valuable. We also have attempted to kind of, like it's an idea that I've coined the term for is radical landscaping, is essentially just encouraging students to reevaluate the way that landscapes are used. And the kind of, you just like see, you're driving down the road like through a neighborhood and you just see endless lawn, you just ask yourself, like, where did this idea come from? Came from Victorian England, which was a society that was very aggressively capitalist, very aggressively colonialist, very aggressively hierarchical, and these ideas have been passed down to us, and so we are trying to encourage those students to see the connection between landscaping practices and all of the paradigms that have led to climate change, and to do their best to understand like all those things in context, and then kind of make their own value judgments as to what is important, what should continue to be done, and how they can continue to interact with their landscape in a more positive way. I think that's it for that slide. So I spoke about this a little bit before. Institutional memory has been a concern throughout this whole process, and so Ryan and I did our best to make that not an issue. We have, like, my thesis was literally a management plan, like 150-page document of the history of it all, the theory behind it, and then specific instructions for how to continue to do it. And so that will be in the library permanently. Hopefully the students will continue to pass on the knowledge that it is there in case they need to go and consult it in the future. I also took a lot of data for my thesis. I took a full inventory of the food forest, like species, the height of the trees, where they are placed. So if in a few years students need to go back and look at that tree, see how it's growing, if they want to supplement further study, they can. I took organic carbon data, which I'll get at this in a second. We have done our best to forge kind of stronger ties with different administrative groups. And it's now part of the organic gardening tutorial, which has always been a thing. I mean, not always, but has been for many years a part of the New College academic experience, and so now that has been expanded. And the picture there is actually a peach tree, which has set fruit. There's like 5 or 6 little tiny peaches on it, which is exciting. Yeah, and also it's just a very diverse space. I think that most people can appreciate the value of biodiversity. We planted 42 large individual perennial species in and around the food forest. Those will obviously need to be pruned and managed over time, but that will just continue to supplement the educational value of the space. There's 159 individuals, 25 species of annual and perennial vining, ground cover, and intercrops. Also all manner of different animals have started using the space. Like before, when it was just a lawn, maybe would see like an egret or something wandering around there every so often, but now there's different varieties of birds, snakes, raccoons, turtles, little tortoises, like all manner of birds, all types of butterflies and dragonflies. Just that small transformation. It's really not a very large space, but just the amount of life that comes to that area now has increased dramatically. The bee population around there is very, very healthy for that reason. And there's little mushrooms popping up too, which is the presence of detritivores and decomposing organisms in a space is actually a good indicator of like the complexity, like the trophic complexity of a space. And it's a very good thing that they started to show up because they're breaking down the mulch, they're sequestering that carbon, and they are kind of proving our theory correct. So yeah, these are the data sets that I took. I using a process called inverse distance weighted interpolation, quite a mouthful. Tested sites throughout the food forest, and then I took soil cores, and then I compared those data to soil cores that I took from the lawn across the road, just to test the differences on organic carbon to essentially gauge how much carbon is being sequestered to the food forest. So yeah, it was a pretty intensive process. I put all the data in R Studio, which uses the statistical programming language R, and generated these charts. So you can see little dots here, those are the points that I tested, and then using the model that I ran over it, it actually interpolates between the points that I tested, and so you can kind of, literally interpolate the organic carbon values in the spaces that I did not test. And so this, obviously the food forest wasn't even a year, it was much less than a year old at the time that I took the data. So, so these values are possibly higher now, but the purpose of this, like the rest of my thesis, was just a reference document. So if students in the future continue to be interested about this aspect of the food forest or any other aspects, then they will have these data to refer to. And yeah, the food forest, like I've spoken before, it's not one thing, it is many different things. It is it's a symbol in a lot of ways. Like, obviously it's not going to fix climate change. It's a very tiny space, but like I said before, it serves as a recruitment of students into the struggle against climate change, all the damaging ideas that have come to it. It's an attempt to heal students' relationships with natural spaces, because we as people that spend a lot of time sitting down indoors, especially students, a lot of time just reading and things, you don't get a lot of time to spend in the outdoors, and there's been a pretty universal experience of students when they engage with this space of just how peaceful and how beautiful and how much you can just observe how much is going on in this very small area. And so we've been doing our best to demonstrate the value of all of that. The political climate in this country right now is unfortunately not ideal for climate relations or relations with climate change research and all those things. And so it is also a political space. There's a lot of inherent political ideology in the reasons why we created it. It's also very rooted in the natural sciences. There's a lot of potential for study, really limitless potential. Like I said before, there's so much activity, animal, just all the different kingdoms of life are really moving in on that space. And so going forward, as the trophic complexity and the biodiversity of that space increases, then students will have many, many more opportunities to learn about the area, and hopefully research will continue. And the merging of the natural and social sciences is very, very important. I read a paper for a class recently that parsed out the ways that scientists need to address climate change, and one of the strongest things that they got at was the dire need for more integration of the natural and social sciences. These things can no longer be separated because people are invariably an issue, or not an issue, but an aspect of the problems being faced. And so the social aspects of all these things must be understood, and they cannot be neglected or seen as inferior. And so this project is a literal physical manifestation of all these ideas. And it's been a very rewarding experience. It's been very productive so far. We've been able to provide the Four Winds Cafe with lots of food. Actually, we've had quite a bumper crop of pumpkins. This is a little pumpkin there, actually grown in the food forest. Pigeon peas are a perennial bean. We've been just pumping those out, just giving to the food forest, or to the Four Winds rather. And then, like I said, all this has happened within the first year. And so if, like, I'm about to graduate, and so the biggest question is, will they continue? I have faith in I think we've chosen our successors well, and so I have faith that it will continue, and the productivity of all this is just beginning, and the value of the space is just beginning to be demonstrated. So, yeah, and those are some sunflowers. The bees love them. If you ever want to go look at a bee, you can just go check these out because there's just covered in bees constantly. And yeah, that's my presentation. Any